I'm going to do a video about cruisers. So cruisers in RC Warship Combat are going to be functioning mostly as a support type vessel. They're in a general fleet battle sense. They're going to be able to deliver safe shots, hopefully to bigger ships without taking a lot of shots in return. And they're going to be fast, use speed rather than pump or other defensive capacities to stay out of trouble. They are on average not going to turn that well because their length to width ratios and rudder sizes are disadvantageous for such. They're not allowed to have side firing cannons, so they can't really inflict the true meat and potatoes of damage that a battleship can inflict. And they are really great campaign ships, so cruisers get to reload throughout the entirety of campaign as many times as you want. So it's common to be able to get 4 cruiser sorties in a campaign. I really like cruisers. I think they're fun. They're a great first boat as you're learning the hobby. They're great for campaign. They're great for if your back is just not tolerating lifting the 30-pound battleship. And they, with some skill, can still inflict a lot of damage on ships without taking a lot of damage in return. They're relatively easy ships to be a net positive captain in terms of points for your team. So I've got a couple destroyers in the mix here too. So I have all these hulls that I have in various states, and only 3 of these I would really consider functional at the moment, soon to be 4. Generally, I'm going to set up cruisers with stern guns. You can do stern or bow guns, but the advantages of having, especially the step deck and the speed, is that you can put guns parallel or really close to parallel with the water, which will extend your range a little bit. And when trouble comes, you just drive forward and get out of trouble. Get out of danger. So generally, there are only a few of the larger destroyers. There's a handful that are 1.5 units. This is nice because you can split that cannon and pump, so you have a half unit pump and a full unit cannon still. And they're just bigger and easier to build than the smaller destroyers. Each nation has basically, each of the major nations, I should say, has a big-ish destroyer. For comparison, the first one here is an early attempt at building a destroyer when I was first starting in the hobby with basically scrap, and I never really did much more with that. It's a gearing. It is really little. It's the smallest of the 1.5 unit ships, destroyers, I should say. All these destroyers are going to be fast, 21 seconds, so they're even faster than cruisers. Again, using nimbleness and speed to stay out of trouble. They really can't take that much damage on average. They're similarly going to function as a support vessel. Generally not going to have a lot of these on the water at any given time, but they can be fun. I battled the Mogador a couple times. That's the bigger one in the back, the lighter gray painted one. It's a French destroyer. It has a single stern cannon. The Akazukis here, there's 2 of them that I was building at the same time. This second one is really close to battle ready. It would just need a little more trimming to get it ready. This one's set up with a bow gun. It's supposed to have some depression, try to shoot some blows with a little destroyer. Destroyers are actually really nimble in turns as well, just because they're so short. You can see compared to the cruisers, they're very short and ultra quick and turn much better than you would think. So those are kind of the worthwhile 1.5 unit ships, generally the larger destroyers, the Akizuki, Mogador, Tashkent is the Russian one that's a little bigger even. The American ones are very little and tricky to get to work, in my opinion. The German large destroyer Z-class can be pretty good. Moving on to Class 2. Class 2 has a lot of different ships in it. They range from basically destroyer size all the way up to not quite heavy cruiser size, in the way that various naval treaties designated classifications of ships. It was actually based on gun size, so 8-inch main armament on the actual real ship would translate to a heavy cruiser, and then less than that would be something that would get classified as a light cruiser. It just so happens that tonnage did kind of scale with those classifications in a lot of ways. There's a few exceptions. The Atlanta class is a mainly anti-aircraft platform that's roughly the size of some of the larger cruisers, and a lot of the nations were interested in having lots of vessels but saving weight and saving costs, so they would build somewhat smaller ships with 6-inch guns, for instance. The Italians were kind of famous for that. So in our hobby, the bulk of the light cruisers are going to be 2.5 or 2.0 units. The ones that are worth building generally are going to be the 2.5 unit ships. You can still maintain 100 rounds of fire and then a half unit pump. Once you're getting down to the 2.0 or 1.5 unit light cruisers, they're basically going to function very much like a destroyer. And my argument is, why would you not just build a destroyer then? If you want to build something that little, you get the speed and maneuverability perks. A lot of the issue with building a lot of the light cruisers is weight. Getting them to sit well and travel well through the water can be a challenge. It's becoming easier with improved battery and other technologies that just make building smaller ships easier. So actually, it's a little bit out of order here, but the Agano here and the Duca d'Aosta are the only two light cruisers that I have. They're both 2.5 units. The Aoba is between them, and I put it here to show the similarities here. Generally the larger 2.5 unit type cruisers, again, that are, in my opinion, worth building, are going to be larger. It's more similar to the rest of the heavy cruisers you can see down the line here. One of the things that does tend to hold sort of true is that a lot of the light cruisers are going to have a little bit narrower beam. So the width of these light cruisers compared to like the width of the heavy cruisers is just going to mean that the side-to-side stability and the tendency for the ship to rock and roll and be less stable of a platform is just something that has to be considered when you're picking a ship, but also when you're building it. So the Aoba here is technically a heavy cruiser, again, because of the actual gun size on the thing. A lot of the Japanese cruisers are extremely similar in that they are flush deck, but they kind of have a little bit of a swoop downwards at the end. Again, to kind of save weight, they did that rather than building them flush all the way across. This is challenging. These things will sit pretty low in the water, so you have to make sure that you're prepared to build a good deck seal so that water doesn't just pour in every time you drive or turn. In general, the step deck style of cruiser that was really popular in the interwar and World War II era are going to be just favorable for the hobby in general. The nice thing about that is that you have a little more reserve at the bow. If you look at the Duca d'Aosta here, you can see the step goes until about the funnel, and then it steps down. So you get the best of both worlds. You have a little bit more reserve in the bow, a little more target area, and then when you're driving, you're gonna get water splashing around pretty close to the deck, but that that low profile in the stern is going to, again, mean that you can keep your cannons really low to the water, which is favorable. It's harder to get consistent shots out of cannons, stern cannons that are supposed to be, you know, firing at some kind of medium range. You're going to have trouble with effective target range if they're too high above the water and shooting down. So that's kind of the thought with the light cruisers. Heavy cruisers are gonna, again, mostly, there's some exceptions, but mostly we're talking about class 3, and then a few of the super heavy cruisers, the 3.5 unit rather than 3.0 unit ships. Again, in general, any of the step deck designs are going to be pretty favorable. I have a couple other hulls. I should have grabbed I do have a Cleveland that is just really tall in the stern. It's going to be hard to get a decent amount of effective firing angles onto that. So these two are the Americans. This is my first ship I ever built. It's a Minneapolis wood hull. There's some flaws with it. It's a really nice ship though. Any of the American sort of Indianapolis, New Orleans type cruisers are going to be really favorable. The next one is a Houston. Very, very similar ships. The Houston is a very old kit that I've tried to resuscitate. I don't know what'll ever happen to it, but you can see they're almost identical in terms of the overall size and shape. The Houston has the step a little bit farther forward. This is the Zara. Again, these are all very, very, very similar ships in terms of how they're going to function, how they're going to battle. You know, it's mostly what do you like to look at? What nation do you want to build? Those are as big a factors as anything when choosing between some of these very, very similar cruisers. Again, with the principle in mind that a step deck is favorable. And then this is the Tourville. It's a rather large French cruiser. Again, you can see all the heavy cruisers. It's maybe hard to tell in the video, but they're just a little beamier than these light cruisers, which is going to lead to better side stability in the water. They're just going to rock and bounce a little less. Other kind of things to think about, though they aren't necessarily deal makers or breakers, you know, the amount of superstructure. I actually had to rebuild the Zara's superstructure because I built it too heavy and it was just a little unstable. So some ships have a ton of superstructure. Some ships like the Italian are rather minimal here in the amount of total above the waterline weight, or above the deck weight, I should say. The Aoba it probably has a little bit too much superstructure to easily make it. You know, I like durable superstructure. A lot of these are made out of ABS plastic. I tried making forms and making my own custom fiberglass funnels, for instance, on a lot of these ships. These are fiberglass that I made just to try to save some weight. They hold up pretty well. I have a couple examples here of ships that I have that I've never battled or aren't really anywhere that close to complete. But the Lützow is the German, they called it pocket battleship. And then the Prinz Eugen is another German, very large cruiser. There's like the Baltimore, I guess the Takao, the very large cruisers that end up getting to be 3.5 units. The advantage there is that you can put 3 cannons and a half pump, so you get more firepower, but they start to get really big. Unfortunately, the Lützow is a nice size in general. It's beamy, but not too long. It's very similar to the other heavy cruisers. The biggest problem with this ship is that it has an elevated stern gun here. The whole ship is really pretty tall. If they would have put this turret down on the lower deck, it would be much easier to get this thing to work well, and it's just extremely narrow in the stern. And so getting the thing to actually turn can be challenging because it's just harder to control the prop wash when you have such a narrow stern. A little bit flatter sterns like these American ones here, these are just going to be easier to put a rudder on there. where you can actually control the wash a little bit and get it to turn decent. The other, I don't think I said it earlier, one of the other main principles of, why would you build one ship or another, it has to do with the stern setup in terms of how many rudders, what size of rudders, how many props. So in general, there's like the Foch is a single screw French heavy cruiser. It's very similar to the Tourville otherwise and gets 2 rudders. The thing torque rolls when it drives a fair bit, but it can turn like an animal, and it's just kind of that trade-off. Would you rather turn a little better or have a little better acceleration and a little more stability when you're accelerating? And then the size of rudder too is something that turns out to be pretty important. So when you have a ship that doesn't turn well, every extra little bit of rudder makes a huge difference. And so what happens is the way things are scaled, the Class 2 ships just have such a small rudder compared to the Class 3 ships that are actually not that otherwise different in size. So that it can be challenging to get a Class 2 ship to turn quite as well. The destroyers, on the other hand, are actually kind of odd in that the way that the rudder size scales is that they actually get, compared to the size of propellers you're going to use, pretty enormous rudders. So it's just kind of a weird thing in the way that things scale as far as the amount of thrust you need and the amount of rudder surface you need to make things turn decently well. And again, that's another downside of the 3.5 unit ships, is that they just, for how big they are, they don't get enough rudder probably. Another just kind of quick consideration here. Mostly, I'm saying all of my general thoughts and ideas with the idea in mind that I'm not going to generally put bow guns on this. This destroyer is different. It's a bit of more of an experimental thing that I'm going to try. The general cruiser otherwise is, again, it's just hard to get a good placement of a bow gun on these, and bow guns in general are difficult to use because you have to put your ship in danger when you're going to try to shoot it. It's much harder to control your ship when you're backing out rather than just driving away. So stern guns, generally the way to go. Another thing, it's really subtle, but it may matter, it may not that much. It's sort of favorable to have the sternmost turret farther back if you can. It just allows you to use a wider range of depression angles if you want. For instance, the Zara has the sternmost turret pretty far forward, and so you're going to hit the deck if you're not careful when you're shooting, if you're not careful with the angle that you're using. And so something like the Americans here, the barrels are a couple inches from the stern of the ship rather than a solid 6-8 inches from the stern of the ship on some of those. So that's kind of the general discussion that I wanted to go through when thinking about cruisers and just smaller boats in general. Again, I think these are a lot of fun. They're all internally set up very similar, and maybe on a different video I'll go through how I think about placing the internal components of a cruiser, and this was meant to be more of an overview of what I'm thinking about or what I've found useful or competitive when thinking about cruisers in general and which cruiser to build. Thank you.